The sky above Earth turned red at exactly 8:17 in the morning. Not the soft red of sunrise, but a deep burning red that swallowed the clouds and made the air feel heavy. People stopped in the streets and looked up. Phones slipped from hands. Cars slowed in the middle of traffic because something massive was blocking the sun. It was not a storm, not a plane, not anything human. It was a ship so large that it looked like a second continent hanging in the sky, silent and still, like it had always been there, waiting. News channels broke into every screen. Emergency alerts screamed across devices. Governments tried to contact the object, but no signal returned. Then every television, every phone, every public screen in the world went black at the same time, and a single image appeared, a throne made of dark metal and living light, floating in space. And on that throne sat a woman wearing armor that shimmered like starlight, her eyes calm, her face cold and beautiful, and behind her, fleets of ships filled the darkness like endless stars. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She simply spoke in a clear, steady voice that every human could understand. People of Earth, do not fear. I have not come to destroy you. Her voice carried power, but also something else, something personal. I have come to claim what was promised to me. Confusion spread across the planet. Leaders demanded answers. Military forces prepared weapons that looked like toys compared to the fleet above them. Social media exploded with panic and wild guesses. But the woman on the throne did not move. She lifted one hand slightly, and the image zoomed closer to her face. And then she said a name. It was not the name of a president, not a general, not a scientist. It was the name of a simple man who lived in a small city and worked as a repair mechanic, a man who spent his days fixing broken engines and old machines, a man who had never left his country, never asked for power, never imagined the stars would ever notice him. When he heard his name echo from every screen around him, he dropped the wrench in his hand. The metal hit the ground with a sharp sound that felt louder than the fleet in the sky. His co-workers stared at him like he had grown wings. Outside, sirens began to rise in the distance, and within minutes, military vehicles surrounded the small repair shop. Soldiers stepped out, serious and tense, calling his name again, but this time in person. He did not run. He could not even think clearly enough to try. His heart pounded so hard it felt painful, because deep inside his memory, something old and buried began to wake up. Something about red skies and promises made in laughter. Something about a girl who was never like the others. They took him to a secure location. Cameras flashing everywhere. The world watching every step he took. And above them all, the giant ship remained still, patient, as if it already knew how this would end. As he sat alone in a quiet room, guards outside the door, he closed his eyes and saw a different red sky. Not from a ship, but from a sunset many years ago, when he was just a boy living in a poor colony near the edge of the city. Back then the buildings were broken and the streets were rough, and children learned to be strong early. That was where he met her. She had appeared suddenly one summer, a quiet girl with strange silver eyes that seemed to shine even in the dark. She did not talk much, and other children avoided her, because she felt different, like she did not belong to the world around her. Some boys used to tease her, call her names, push her around because she never fought back. One day, he stepped in front of her and told him to stop. He was not the strongest boy, but he was stubborn, and that was enough. The bullies left, and she looked at him in a way no one had ever looked at him before, like he had done something important. They began to sit together every evening on top of an old storage building, watching the red sunset spread across the sky. She used to speak about stars like they were old friends, about worlds that sounded too big to be real. He thought it was just imagination, a child's dream. He would laugh and tell her she watched too many movies. One evening, as the sky turned deep red again, she asked him in a soft voice, "Will you stay with me forever?" He laughed without thinking, young and careless, and said, "Of course I will. I'll even marry you if you want." She did not laugh. She took his hand seriously and pressed her small palm against his, and with a sharp piece of metal she made a tiny cut on both their palms. Their blood mixed under the red sky, and she whispered, "Then it is a promise." The next day she was gone. No goodbye, no trace, as if she had never existed. and over the years he convinced himself she had only been a strange childhood memory. Now the door in the secure room opened slowly, and every screen in the world switched back on, showing the giant ship descending toward Earth, a bright beam of light touching the ground outside the building. Soldiers stepped back in fear, and from that light she appeared, no longer a quiet girl, but an empress wrapped in power and command, her silver eyes exactly the same as he remembered. She walked toward him calmly while the world held its breath, stopped just a few steps away, and looked at him not as a ruler looks at a subject, but as a girl looks at an old friend. "You promised," she said softly, and above them, the red sky burned once again. If you want to see what happens next in this impossible story, make sure you subscribe to this channel and stay with us, because this promise is only the beginning. The world did not breathe when she stepped forward. It felt as if time itself slowed down to watch what would happen next. Soldiers stood frozen with weapons in their shaking hands. Leaders stared from secure rooms across the planet, and cameras captured every second as the most powerful being in the galaxy stood face to face with a simple human mechanic, her silver eyes locked onto his as if nothing else existed in the universe. He could not find words. His mind felt split between the man he had become and the boy he used to be, because standing in front of him was both the Empress of 1,000 worlds and the quiet girl who once sat beside him under a broken rooftop, watching sunsets in silence. "You disappeared," he finally whispered, his voice dry and small compared to the power that surrounded her. "I was taken home," she replied calmly, and there was no anger in her tone, only certainty. The air around her shimmered slightly, not with heat, but with something deeper, something that did not belong to Earth. Her armor moved like liquid metal, forming and shifting softly as if it were alive, and the soldiers near the doorway stepped back without even realizing it, because some instinct inside them understood that their weapons meant nothing. "You were never from here," he said slowly, and as he spoke the words, pieces of memory began to fall into place like a puzzle he had ignored for years. She gave the smallest nod. "No, I was not." The screens across the world changed again, showing images not of Earth, but of distant planets, cities floating above oceans of light, towers reaching into skies filled with multiple suns, fleets of ships moving in perfect formation, and at the center of it all, a symbol glowing bright like a crown made of stars. "My name is not the one you knew," she continued. "On my world, I am called the first daughter of the celestial throne, heir to the eternal empire." Gasps filled news studios, governments began whispering urgently. Analysts tried to understand what they were seeing, but none of it mattered to him, because he was still staring at her face, searching for the girl who once asked him a simple question under a red sky. "Why Earth?" he asked quietly. She looked at him in a way that almost seemed human again, almost soft, "Because Earth was the safest place to hide me." And then she explained, not to the world, but to him. Years ago, her empire had been on the edge of civil war, powerful families fighting for control of the throne, assassins moving through shadows across entire star systems. And when her mother, the Empress before her, realized that her daughter would be the first target, she made a decision that shocked the High Council. She sent the royal heir away, farther than anyone would expect, to a small blue planet considered weak and unimportant. She erased my records, removed me from all systems, and placed me here as a child with no memory of my true identity. She said, "But memory is not so easily destroyed." That explained the strange things he remembered, the way she talked about stars as if she had seen them up close, the way she sometimes looked lost when people discussed normal human problems, the sadness that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "I began to remember slowly," she continued, "fragments at first, dreams of ships and voices calling my name, then more, training hidden inside my mind waking up, knowledge returning. And then you vanished," he said. "Yes," she answered simply, "they found me." A new image appeared on the global screens, showing a moment from space, a smaller craft descending silently into Earth's atmosphere years ago, invisible to human eyes, taking a single child from a rooftop under a red sunset. "My mother had fallen," she said, her voice steady but colder now. The Empire was breaking, and the throne needed its heir. He swallowed hard. So you left. I was taken, she corrected gently, and I did not have the power to choose. There was something sharp in those words, something that hinted at years of struggle behind her calm face. When I returned, the Empire was already burning, she went on. I was 16 by your years when I first commanded a fleet, 18 when I ended the Civil War, 20 when I took the throne. The world listened in silence, because she did not speak like someone boasting. She spoke like someone listing facts carved into stone. I rebuilt what was broken, united worlds that hated each other, expanded our borders beyond what even my ancestors imagined. The fleet in the sky shifted slightly, almost as if responding to her voice. But through all of it, she said, and for the first time her eyes softened again, I remembered a promise made under a red sky on a forgotten planet. He felt his chest tighten. It was just a joke, he said quickly, almost desperately. For you, she replied. It was laughter for me. It was the first choice anyone ever gave me. Those words hit harder than any weapon could have. The screens changed again, this time showing the high council of her empire, tall alien figures with different shapes and forms, their expressions unreadable but their posture tense. They do not approve, she said calmly. They believe humans are weak, short-lived, unworthy of standing beside the throne. He let out a small, bitter laugh. They are not wrong. Her gaze sharpened instantly. They are. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, not from cold, but from power gathering quietly around her. Strength is not only measured in years or firepower, she continued. I have conquered planets with armies, but the one thing I could not conquer was a simple promise. Outside, across the planet, military leaders received new data. The alien fleet had the ability to erase Earth within minutes. Yet they remained still, waiting. I did not come to threaten your world, she said clearly, making sure every human could hear. I came to honor my word. He stared at her, torn between disbelief and fear. And if I refuse, he asked slowly. For the first time, a shadow crossed her face. If you refuse, she said quietly, Earth remains alone, a galaxy that is not kind. The meaning was clear without being spoken fully. Protection would vanish, alliances would not come, and somewhere beyond the visible stars, enemies existed who would not be as patient as she was. You would let them suffer, he whispered. I would respect your choice, she answered, and that was somehow more terrifying. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was heavier, because the promise was no longer a childish game. It was a decision that could shape the future of an entire planet. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I did not cross half the galaxy for politics, she said softly. I came because when I was small and afraid on a world that was not mine, you stood in front of me and chose to protect me, and no one had ever done that before. His heart pounded painfully as he realized something far more dangerous than alien fleets was standing in front of him. This was not just an empress claiming a promise. This was a ruler who had shaped galaxies, and she had chosen him. Above them, the massive warship shifted slightly, casting a deeper red shadow across the city, as if reminding everyone that time to decide would not last forever. The world did not calm after her words. It fractured. News channels split into endless debates. Some called it a fairy tale. Some called it a threat wrapped in romance. Governments held emergency meetings behind sealed doors, and outside the secure building where he stood, crowds began to gather, some cheering his name, some shouting in anger, because suddenly one ordinary man carried the future of Earth on his shoulders. Inside the room, silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. He felt smaller than he ever had before, not because she stood taller or stronger, but because her presence carried history, battles, decisions that shaped billions of lives, and he was just a mechanic who fixed broken engines and worried about rent at the end of the month. You cannot be serious, he said finally, running a hand through his hair. This is not how life works. We were kids. I did not even understand what marriage meant. Her expression did not change, but something distant moved in her eyes. You understood enough to stand in front of me when others pushed me down, she said quietly. You understood enough to give me your word. That was just kindness, he replied quickly. Kindness, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. Do you know how rare that is where I come from? Before he could answer, the door opened and several high-ranking officials stepped in carefully, their faces tense but respectful toward her, fearful toward the situation. One of them spoke directly to him. You need to understand the scale of this, the official said. Her empire controls more than 4,000 inhabited systems. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. If this alliance becomes official, Earth moves from vulnerable to protected overnight. And if I say no, he asked, already knowing the answer. The official hesitated, glancing at the Empress before speaking. Then we remain alone. Alone in a galaxy they had just learned was full of powers beyond imagination. The weight pressed harder against his chest, because now this was no longer about a childhood memory. It was about responsibility on a scale no human had ever faced before. I never asked for this, he said under his breath. She stepped closer, her voice lowering so only he could hear again. Neither did I. That simple sentence carried more truth than all the speeches outside. He studied her face carefully, searching for arrogance or manipulation. But what he found unsettled him more. There was no demand in her eyes, only expectation mixed with something almost vulnerable, something she was clearly not used to showing. You could choose anyone, he said. A war hero, a noble from your empire, someone powerful, someone who understands your world. I have met thousands of powerful beings, she answered calmly. Most of them want the throne. None of them want me. The words hit in a way he did not expect, because behind the title of Empress stood a person who had grown up surrounded by ambition and fear, not friendship. I built an empire that fears disappointing me, she continued. But you were the only one who was not afraid of me before you even knew what I was. He remembered that rooftop again, the way she sometimes stared at the horizon as if waiting for something to come, the sadness he had noticed but never understood. Back then he had only thought she was lonely. Now he realized she had been carrying secrets larger than planets. Outside the building, protests began forming in some cities. People holding signs, some supporting the Union, some rejecting alien involvement entirely. Social media turned into a battlefield of opinions. And above it all, the fleet remained perfectly still, patient, like a silent reminder that Earth's fate was tied to one decision. Then a sudden tremor shook the building slightly. Alarms flickered for a brief second before stabilizing. Soldiers rushed to communication devices, whispers spreading quickly through the room. She did not even turn her head. A warning shot, she said calmly. A warning from who? One officer demanded nervously. From those who believe I am making a mistake, she replied. The screens changed again, this time showing distant space beyond Earth, smaller ships, sleek and sharp, emerging from hidden positions at the edge of the solar system, not attacking Earth, but positioning themselves strategically. My High Council does not fully support this, she explained without emotion. They believe humans are unpredictable, emotionally driven, weak in lifespan and military strength. That is not wrong, he muttered again. Her eyes flashed slightly, not with anger, but with intensity. They believe you will weaken me, she corrected, and some of them would rather see me removed than see a human stand beside the throne. A chill ran through the room as the meaning settled. This was bigger than Earth, bigger than romance. This was political tension inside an empire that spanned galaxies. So, I'm not just a husband, he said slowly, understanding dawning. I'm a problem. You are a challenge to tradition, she answered, and tradition resists change. Before he could respond, a loud impact echoed somewhere outside the facility, not close enough to destroy, but close enough to be felt. Security systems activated immediately, soldiers moving into defense positions. This is exactly what I mean, he said sharply. You bring danger with you. She finally looked toward the disturbance, her expression hardening instantly into that of a ruler who had commanded fleets into war. Danger follows power, whether I stand here or not, she said, The difference is whether Earth faces it alone or beside me. Another screen showed one of her distant ships being struck by a sudden energy blast from one of the newly arrived vessels. Internal conflict had already begun, not on Earth, but in orbit beyond it. They are testing boundaries, she said quietly. If I appear weak, they will push harder, and marrying a human looks weak to them. He realized. Yes, she answered simply. Silence fell again, but this time it carried the sound of distant conflict, faint flashes of light visible high above the planet as alien ships maneuvered carefully. Not yet full war, but something close to it. He felt anger rising inside him now, mixed with fear. You are asking me to step into a war I do not understand. I am asking you to decide whether a promise means something, she replied softly. Her tone was no longer commanding. It was almost pleading in a way she would never allow anyone else to see. You once told me you would stay, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding above them. Now I stand here, no longer a child, no longer afraid, but still waiting for your answer. The room seemed smaller suddenly, as if the entire universe had narrowed down to this one moment between them. Outside, distant flashes grew brighter in the sky as opposing ships tested each other's strength. He looked at her not as an empress now, but as the girl who had once sat beside him under a broken rooftop, watching a red sunset and asking a simple question. But this time, the red sky above them was not from a setting sun. It was from warships preparing for something far greater. The red sky above Earth was no longer just a symbol. It had become a battlefield waiting to ignite. Small flashes of light flickered in orbit as alien ships shifted positions. And though no full-scale attack had begun, the message was clear. The Empress was being challenged not by humans, but by her own empire. Inside the secure building, tension grew heavier with every passing second. Military officers watched live feeds from satellites that barely understood what they were seeing. Ships moving faster than physics should allow, energy pulses that bent light around them. And at the center of it all, the massive flagship that carried the Empress remained steady, unmoving, as if daring anyone to strike it directly. They are testing your authority, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the screen. They are testing your value, she corrected calmly. That answer unsettled him more than the explosions in space, because it meant this was not just political pressure, it was a judgment, and he was the subject of it. A new transmission suddenly forced its way onto every screen in the room. Not the calm image of the Empress, but a tall alien figure with sharp angular features and dark armor that looked more like a weapon than clothing, his eyes glowing faintly with cold intelligence. Your Majesty, the alien said, bowing slightly but without warmth, the Council requests that you reconsider your emotional decision. Her expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop again. State your meaning clearly, she replied. The throne does not belong to personal attachments, the alien continued. It belongs to strength, stability, and legacy. Binding the empire to a primitive species risks destabilization across multiple systems. Primitive, he repeated under his breath. The alien's glowing eyes shifted toward him for the first time, studying him like a scientist might study an insect. Humans have not achieved faster than light travel. Their military power is insignificant. Their lifespan is short. Their political systems unstable, he said without emotion. Such a species cannot stand beside the celestial throne. Before anyone else could react, she took a single step forward, and the lights in the room flickered as if reacting to her presence. You mistake advancement for worth, she said evenly. You mistake power for value. We mistake nothing, the alien answered, and behind him several other figures appeared, members of the High Council, their forms different in shape and color, but united in expression, cold calculation. The Empire survived civil war through discipline, not sentiment. The word sentiment hung in the air like an insult. He felt anger rising in his chest now, not because they doubted humanity's strength, but because they spoke as if kindness and loyalty were weaknesses, as if choosing someone for who they are rather than what they offer was foolish. You want strength, she said slowly, her voice carrying a sharp edge now. Then look above you. The view shifted to space again, where one of the Council-aligned ships moved aggressively toward the flagship, not firing, but pushing closer than allowed by Imperial protocol. Gasps filled the control room as a sudden burst of energy shot from the Council ship, striking a defensive barrier around the flagship, the impact bright enough to light the entire sky red for a moment. It was no longer testing, it was defiance. The soldiers in the building instinctively raised weapons, though they knew it was meaningless, and he felt the ground tremble faintly beneath his feet as distant shockwaves rippled through the atmosphere. They would start a war over this, he said in disbelief. They would start a war over control, she corrected, eyes fixed on the screen. Her flagship responded not with chaos, but with precision, a single pulse of controlled energy that disabled the attacking vessel's weapons without destroying it, a warning rather than retaliation. You see, she continued calmly, addressing the Council. You fear that standing beside a human makes me weak, yet it is fear that drives you to attack your own fleet. The alien's expression darkened. We fear instability, he replied sharply. The Empire cannot afford unpredictability. Humanity is unpredictable, she admitted without hesitation. That is why they survive. The Council figures exchanged silent glances, clearly dissatisfied with her defense. And then the alien leader spoke again, his voice colder than before. If you proceed with this union, you risk rebellion in at least 12 major systems. And if I abandon my word, she replied quietly, I risk becoming the very ruler my mother warned me against. That sentence carried weight he did not fully understand yet, but he could see something shift in the room. This was not just about him anymore. This was about who she chose to be as Empress. Another violent flash lit the sky, this time closer, debris from a damaged Council ship burning through Earth's upper atmosphere before disintegrating safely. But the message was visible to everyone watching below. The Empire was divided. Suddenly, alarms blared inside the facility. Not from orbit, but from within the building itself, security teams shouting through radios, footsteps echoing rapidly down the halls. What is happening? One officer demanded. Before anyone could answer, the door at the far end of the room exploded inward in a shower of sparks and metal, smoke filling the air as armored figures rushed through, not human soldiers, but alien commandos wearing dark suits marked with the same symbol seen behind the Council leader. Gasps and shouts erupted as guards attempted to respond, but the alien armor deflected bullets effortlessly, moving with speed far beyond human capability. They would dare, someone whispered in horror. They do not see Earth as neutral ground, she said calmly, stepping forward as if this was expected. One of the commandos aimed a weapon directly at him, energy building at its core, and in that instant he understood fully this was not symbolic resistance. This was an attempt to remove the problem permanently. Before the weapon could fire, she moved. It was not fast in a blur of motion. It was controlled, precise, her armor shifting and expanding around her arm as she raised it, a shimmering barrier forming in front of him just as the blast struck, the impact loud enough to crack the walls and send shockwave through the room. She did not stagger. She did not hesitate. She simply extended her other hand and released a narrow beam of concentrated light that sliced through the attacker's weapon without harming the being inside, disabling, not killing. Two more commandos advanced, and this time he reacted without thinking, grabbing a nearby metal tool from a broken console and throwing it toward a flickering energy panel above them. Sparks exploded downward, disrupting the alien armor's shielding system for a brief second. It was small, simple, human improvisation, but it worked. Her eyes flickered toward him for a fraction of a second, something like surprise crossing her face, and in that tiny opening, she neutralized the remaining attackers with swift, precise movements. Within moments, the room was silent again, except for smoke and the sound of distant alarms. Security forces rushed in, securing the disabled commandos, and above them in orbit, the Council ships began retreating slightly, not in surrender, but in recalculation. She turned slowly to look at him, studying him in a way she had not before. "You adapted," she said softly. "I panicked," he replied honestly. "Humans call it panic," she said. "My generals call it tactical creativity." Outside, the red sky burned brighter as Imperial forces repositioned, lines drawn clearly now between loyalty and rebellion. "The Empire does not hate humanity," she said quietly, watching the retreating ships. "It fears what it cannot predict." "And right now," he answered, looking at the damage around them, "I think that fear just became very real." The attack inside the building was only the beginning. Within hours, the silent tension in orbit exploded into open conflict. Streaks of light tore across the red sky as Imperial ships loyal to the Empress formed defensive lines around Earth, while Council forces moved into aggressive formations beyond the moon. What had once been political disagreement was now war, and every human on the planet could see it with their own eyes. Cities across Earth went dark as power grids were shut down to prevent panic. Emergency broadcasts played on battery-powered devices, and for the first time in history, humanity watched a battle that did not belong to them unfold in their own sky. Children stood at windows, adults held their breath, and above them alien fleets clashed with precision and terrifying beauty. Inside a temporary command center built beneath the city, he stood beside her, no longer just a mechanic dragged into chaos, but a symbol whether he liked it or not. World leaders now listened when he spoke, not because of his experience, but because the Empress stood near him and did not contradict him. "They will not risk destroying Earth," she said calmly as holographic projections displayed fleet movements in real time. "It would weaken my position and prove their recklessness." "So they fight around us," he replied, watching as two massive ships exchanged bursts of light that bent space itself. "Yes," she answered. "They want to force me into retreat, to show the Empire I cannot protect what I choose." Her voice remained steady, but he noticed the subtle tension in her posture. This was not just strategy, this was personal. Another explosion flashed across the projection. One of her loyal ships disabled and drifting, not destroyed but removed from battle. And across Earth, people flinched as debris streaked harmlessly through the atmosphere like falling stars. "They're pushing harder," an officer reported urgently. "Council reinforcements just entered the system." The hologram shifted, revealing new warships emerging from folds in space near the edge of the solar system, sleeker and more heavily armed than those already fighting. "They prepared for this," he muttered. "They have been preparing since the moment I announced my intention," she replied quietly. A new transmission forced its way into the command center. Not the cold council leader from before, but another figure, taller, wearing armor marked with symbols of rebellion rather than imperial authority. "Your Majesty," the figure said with mocking politeness. "The Empire fractures because of your attachment to a species that cannot defend itself." She did not respond immediately. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on the tactical display, calculating. "You still have time," the rebel continued. "Withdraw from Earth, abandon this union, and the Council will recognize your authority without resistance." "And if I refuse?" she asked calmly. "Then we demonstrate to the Empire why sentiment has no place on the throne." The transmission ended abruptly, replaced by a sudden surge of hostile movement. Rebel ships accelerating toward a cluster of human satellites orbiting Earth. "They are targeting our systems," a human technician shouted. "Communications, navigation, everything." Her jaw tightened slightly. "They want humanity to feel powerless," she said. Without waiting for orders, he stepped toward one of the holographic consoles. Studying the patterns of movement, he did not understand alien technology fully, but he understood systems, engines, patterns of efficiency. "They are focusing on predictable points," he said quickly. "Our satellites move in fixed orbits. They expect fixed responses." Several officers glanced at him skeptically, but she watched him closely. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "Change the pattern," he replied, fingers moving across the interface as he pulled up Earth's satellite network. "We cannot match their power, but we can change our behavior." Within minutes, he coordinated with ground control teams, adjusting satellite rotations, shutting down some units, and rerouting signals through unexpected channels, forcing the rebel ships to adjust targeting systems constantly. It was small compared to the scale of battle above, but it disrupted the rebels' clean strategy. "They are recalculating," an alien officer loyal to her reported in surprise. "Human interference is complicating their assault." A faint hint of satisfaction crossed her face. "Unpredictable," she murmured softly. Above the planet, Loyalist ships used the distraction to reposition, flanking rebel forces and pushing them back from Earth's immediate orbit. But the rebels had not finished. Suddenly, the projection zoomed out to reveal a massive vessel entering the system, larger than any other Council ship seen so far, its structure darker, lined with weapon arrays that pulsed with unstable energy. Silence filled the room as the scale of it became clear. "That is a dread sovereign," she said quietly, and for the first time there was no calm in her voice. "It can destroy fleets," one of her commanders added grimly. "An Earth," someone else whispered. The massive ship did not fire immediately. Instead, it moved slowly into position between Earth and her flagship, blocking her defensive line. "They are forcing a choice," she realized. On every screen across the world the image appeared, the dread sovereign hovering like a shadow over humanity, and then the rebel leader's voice returned. "Withdraw from Earth, and the planet remains untouched," he said coldly. "Remain, and we erase it to prove your weakness." Gasps echoed in homes, offices, shelters across the globe. He felt the weight of those words like a physical force pressing against his chest. This was the moment everything had been building toward. "You cannot fight that ship without leaving Earth exposed," one of her generals warned. She stared at the projection, calculating risks faster than anyone else in the room could comprehend. "I will not abandon this world," she said firmly. "And if they fire?" he asked quietly. Her answer was simple and devastating. "Then I shield Earth with everything I have." "That would leave you vulnerable," he pressed. "Yes," she admitted. The rebel ship began charging its primary weapon, energy building at its core, visible even from the planet's surface as a growing point of violent light. People screamed, some prayed, some simply stared at the sky, unable to look away. He stepped closer to her, ignoring the officers around them. "You once said strength is not just power," he said urgently. "Then prove it now." She looked at him sharply. "Explain." "They expect a direct response," he continued, thinking faster than ever before. "They expect you to defend Earth head-on. What if we make them question their own weapon?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, understanding forming. "Overload their targeting logic," he said. "We feed them false threat signals from multiple angles, make it look like a larger fleet is emerging behind them. That technology requires quantum deception arrays," one alien commander objected. "Humans do not possess." "But you do," he interrupted, looking at her. For a split second the command center fell silent as she processed the idea. "Risky, bold, unconventional. Unpredictable," she repeated again softly. The dread sovereign's weapon reached full charge, a beam of concentrated destruction ready to fire. At the last possible second, dozens of Phantom Fleet signatures appeared behind the rebel ship. Projections generated by her flagship, but shaped using patterns he helped adjust based on human satellite routing chaos. The rebel commanders hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Loyalist ships surged forward from unexpected vectors, striking the dread sovereign's weapon arrays before it could fire, disabling its primary cannon in a blinding explosion that lit the entire sky white instead of red. Cheers erupted across the command center as the massive rebel vessel drifted powerless, not destroyed but defeated. Across Earth people cried in relief, some falling to their knees, others shouting in celebration. She turned slowly toward him, her expression no longer distant or calculating, but something warmer, something proud. "They called your species weak," she said quietly. "Yet today a human mind helped save my empire." He shook his head slightly, still overwhelmed. "I just did not want to see anyone burn for a promise made by two kids." Above them, rebel ships began retreating, not fully defeated, but forced back for now. The war was not over, but Earth still stood, and the Promise had just survived its first true battle. The battle above Earth ended in silence. But it was not peace. Debris from damaged ships drifted slowly through orbit like frozen scars, and distant rebel vessels pulled back beyond the edge of the system. Not defeated, only waiting. The red glow in the sky faded slightly, but the tension did not, because everyone understood this had been only the first strike. Inside the command center, the air felt heavy. Exhausted officers leaned against consoles, human and alien alike, and for the first time since her arrival, the Empress looked tired. Not weak, but burdened, as if something long buried had finally risen to the surface. "They will regroup," one of her generals said quietly. "The Council will not accept this humiliation. They already expected resistance," she replied calmly, though her eyes were distant. This was only the opening move. He stood beside her, watching the tactical display clear slowly as loyalist fleets repositioned to protect Earth's orbit, and a question that had been forming in his mind since the war began finally demanded to be asked. "You said you were sent here to hide," he said, turning toward her, "but that is not the whole truth, is it?" She did not answer immediately, and that silence alone confirmed his suspicion. The remaining officers exchanged uneasy looks before she raised a hand slightly, signaling them to leave. One by one the room emptied until only the two of them remained, surrounded by dim lights and distant echoes of war reports. When the door sealed shut, she removed the outer layer of her armor, the living metal retracting smoothly to reveal simpler garments beneath. Less ruler, more person. "My exile was not only protection," she said finally, her voice softer now. "It was prophecy." He frowned slightly. "Prophecy. In our empire," she explained slowly, "there are ancient records older than the throne itself, fragment from a civilization that existed before ours. They predicted cycles of rise and collapse, and within those fragments was a line about the final Empress of this era." She walked toward the large observation window overlooking the city, where humans moved cautiously under a sky still marked by distant wreckage. The record said the Empress would choose a world considered weak, and through that choice the empire would either fall or be reborn. He felt a chill run through him. "And your mother believed that world was Earth." "She did," she answered, "not because of military strength or resources, but because humans were different." "Different how?" he asked. She turned to face him fully, silver eyes reflecting faint city lights. "You adapt faster than any species we have encountered. You survive in chaos. You build meaning in suffering. And most dangerous of all, you form loyalty beyond logic." He let out a small breath. Loyalty beyond logic does not sound like a military advantage. "It is not," she replied. "It is a cultural one. Empires are not destroyed only by enemies. They rot from within when trust disappears." She stepped closer again, her tone steady, but carrying something deeply personal now. "My mother feared that our empire had grown too powerful and too cold. She believed strength without empathy would eventually turn inward and destroy us." "And she sent you here to learn empathy," he said quietly. "She sent me here to experience weakness," she corrected, "to live among a species that had no control over the stars, to feel fear, uncertainty, limitation. And me," he added carefully. Her gaze did not break. "You were not planned," she admitted. "You were the variable." He absorbed that slowly, realizing he had never been part of a grand design, only an accident in a prophecy. "When I first began remembering who I was," she continued, "I struggled with two identities, the heir trained to command fleets and the child who sat beside you under a broken rooftop." "And which one won?" he asked. "Neither," she said. "They merged." She paused before continuing, and for the first time since the war began, vulnerability flickered clearly across her face. "When I returned to the Empire after my mother's death, I had to prove I was not softened by exile," she said. "I commanded battles, made decisions that cost millions of lives. I showed no hesitation." "But you remembered Earth," he said. "I remembered the promise," she replied quietly. "Outside, Distant emergency sirens echoed faintly through the city, but in the room there was only silence and truth. The Council fears this prophecy, she went on. They believe choosing Earth fulfills it, and if the prophecy ends in collapse, they lose everything. So they would rather remove you than risk it, he concluded. Yes, she answered simply. He ran a hand across his face, processing the scale of what stood before them. This was not just a war over pride or politics. It was a struggle over the future shape of an empire that had existed for thousands of years. And what do you believe? He asked carefully, fall or rebirth. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. I believe empires that fear change are already dying, she said. And I believe weakness is only weakness until it chooses to stand. Her words were not dramatic, but they carried quiet conviction. And if the prophecy meant something else, he pressed, what if choosing Earth brings destruction? Then it will be my failure, she answered without hesitation. Not yours, not humanity's mine. The weight of that statement settled between them, heavier than any warship in orbit. You still have a choice, she said softly. The prophecy does not bind you. The empire does not own you. You can walk away from this and I will not force you. He looked toward the window at the city below, at ordinary people trying to return to normal after witnessing a war in the sky, people who had never asked to be part of galactic politics. You said humans form loyalty beyond logic, he said slowly. Maybe that is our weakness. Or our strength, she replied. He turned back toward her, no longer seeing just the Empress or the girl from his childhood, but someone standing at the edge of two futures. You crossed half the galaxy for a promise, he said quietly. You fought your own council for it. You risked your throne. Yes, she answered. Then I will not let you stand alone in it, he said. The words were simple, but they carried decision. For a moment she did not react, as if unsure she had heard correctly. You are choosing this, she asked carefully. I am choosing you, he replied. Outside, beyond the atmosphere, Loyalist fleets stabilized their positions, unaware that the true turning point of the war had just happened in a quiet room overlooking a human city. She stepped closer, her expression no longer guarded. Then the prophecy moves forward, she said softly. Far beyond Earth, in hidden regions of space, rebel forces gathered again, unaware that the variable they feared had just made his choice. And somewhere deep within the ancient records of a forgotten civilization, a prediction long dormant began to unfold in a way no council member had expected. The days after his decision did not bring silence. They brought movement. Fleets shifted across star systems. Council factions argued openly for the first time in centuries, and Earth became the center of attention for a galaxy that had once ignored it. Yet inside the chaos there was something new forming, not just alliance, but transformation. The Empress did not return immediately to her capital world. Instead, she remained in Earth's orbit. Not as conqueror, but as guardian, Loyalist fleets established protective rings beyond the moon, and human scientists were invited aboard alien vessels to observe technologies they had once thought impossible. It was not full integration. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something that no empire in her history had attempted. Still, rebellion simmered in distant sectors, and reports arrived daily of council leaders gathering support. The dread sovereign had retreated, but not surrendered. Its commander publicly declared that the throne had been compromised by sentiment, and whispers spread that another larger fleet was being assembled far beyond mapped territory. In the midst of this fragile calm, preparations began quietly for something that felt both simple and impossible: the union between a human and an empress. Earth's leaders debated the location, the symbolism, the security risks, but she made the decision herself. Under a red sky, she said firmly, where the promise was first spoken. And so, on the rooftop of the old storage building that still stood at the edge of the city, now reinforced and surrounded by layered security, preparations were made, not grand decorations of gold and alien crystal, but a recreation of a memory, soft lights strung along the broken railing. A simple platform placed where two children once sat watching the sunset. Above them, her flagship hovered silently, its presence both shield and statement. Loyalist fleets positioned in precise formation across Earth's orbit, while beyond the outer planet scouts monitored rebel movements constantly. He stood alone for a moment before the ceremony, looking out across the city. Remembering a time when his biggest concern had been fixing an engine before sunset, he had not become stronger physically, had not gained alien powers or military rank, but something inside him had changed. He no longer felt like a man dragged into destiny. He felt like someone walking toward it by choice. Footsteps approached behind him. Light but unmistakable, he turned to see her walking forward without heavy armor, dressed instead in ceremonial attire that blended her empire's elegance with subtle elements inspired by Earth, a balance between worlds. The red of sunset began to spread across the sky. Natural this time, not from warships or weapons, but from the sun dipping below the horizon. For a brief moment, the galaxy seemed far away. She stopped in front of him, silver eyes reflecting the same red glow they had years ago. And for the first time since her arrival, she looked less like a ruler and more like the girl who had once waited quietly for an answer. "Do you remember?" she asked softly. "I remember laughing," he replied honestly. "And now," she said. "Now I understand what I promised," he answered. Below them, millions watched through broadcasts, not with panic now, but with cautious hope. Across distant star systems, loyalist commanders observed silently, while rebel spies recorded every detail, searching for weakness. She extended her hand slowly, not commanding, not demanding, simply offering. "When we were children," she said, her voice carrying gently through hidden microphones, "you gave me your word without knowing who I was, without knowing what I would become. And you believed it when I did not," he replied. A faint smile touched her lips, small but real. "This union is not conquest," she continued, now speaking not just to him but to the Empire and Earth alike. "It is not submission, it is not strategy, it is choice." The word echoed deeper than any political speech ever could. In distant space, hidden rebel fleets received confirmation that the ceremony had begun, and far beyond their position, ancient monitoring systems older than her empire recorded fluctuations in energy patterns around Earth, subtle shifts that no one fully understood yet. On the rooftop, he took her hand firmly, feeling the warmth of her skin, not alien, not distant, simply real. "Under this sky," he said clearly, "I choose to keep my promise, not because I was a child, not because I am afraid, but because I believe in the future we can build." For a second the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she placed her other hand over his, mirroring the gesture from years ago. No blood this time, no childish ritual, only intention. "Then let the Empire witness," she declared softly, "that strength and compassion are not enemies." As the sun dipped fully below the horizon, her flagship activated a controlled atmospheric display. Not a weapon, but a projection. The sky above the city transformed into a vast image of countless stars, her empire's symbol appearing gently among them before dissolving into a field of light that blended seamlessly with Earth's night. Across her empire, systems that had been undecided shifted allegiance. Not out of fear, but recognition. They saw a ruler who had risked power to honor her word, and a human who had stood beside her without seeking advantage. The rebel fleets hesitated for the first time, because the narrative they had built of weakness no longer held shape. The galaxy had witnessed not submission, but unity. On the rooftop, as cheers rose from the streets below, she leaned closer, voice low enough that only he could hear. "The prophecy spoke of fall or rebirth," she whispered. "Perhaps it was never about the Empire." He looked at the stars, spreading naturally above them now. "Maybe it was about both our worlds learning what strength really means," he answered. Far beyond the solar system, deep within uncharted space, unknown observers detected the shift and turned their attention toward Earth for the first time. The promise made under a forgotten red sky had not ended a war. It had started something